Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and before that, Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba of Japan addressing the India-Japan Economic Forum. And Prime Minister Narendra Modi particularly came up with a few recommendations across various sectors, from manufacturing to several other sectors like green energy transition and others as well. And towards the end, of course, he spoke of how India and Japan can work together for an Asian century or an ASEAN century for stability and growth. And he, in a way, charted out the path that both countries and companies and businesses of both sides can take to reach that goal.
Yes, there you have it. And let me go across to Ambassador S.R. Tayal, if he's with us. What did you make of the address of both the Prime Ministers? Really, a lot of complementarity there, even an overlap in terms of the kind of vision that they share and the areas that have already been identified for, not just the governments to work together, but even companies, industries, investors to work together and bring them together.
There is a remarkable convergence in the future-oriented outlook of both Prime Minister Ishiba Japan and our Prime Minister, in where India, Japan, economic and industry collaboration can take the two countries, and not only the two countries, but the entire global south. And in that, of course, Japanese Prime Minister specifically referred to Africa. And there are some efforts already. India, Japan, Africa cooperation is there. Now, the Prime Minister, as always does, goes into specifics. And he identified the direction for future collaboration. I think this will all be reflected in the new development strategy and vision document, which we expect to be the output from this summit. And then, of course, transport was mentioned by our Prime Minister as well as by the Japanese Prime Minister. And the future will be in shipbuilding, and nuclear energy was emphasized again and again by our Prime Minister.
Yes, he also mentioned batteries, robotics and semiconductors.
Batteries.
In manufacturing itself.
Green energy. So it is there is a lot of investment by India also in green hydrogen. We have a green hydrogen mission. So India is not coming just as a receiver of Japanese technology. India is positioning itself as a technology power and talent. Prime Minister said technology powerhouse in Japan and talent powerhouse in India. So there is a lot of compatibility. And the future-oriented outlook, whether it's in transport, energy, and then AI, semiconductors, quantum computing, space. So the vision is very clear. And the message to the Japanese business, Indian business, that the road will be smooth. Prime Minister mentioned that on ease of doing business, India has already made great strides. And there is a commission for reforms and deregulation. So our government, our Prime Minister, Niti Aayog, they are very focused. They have understood that there is something which needs to be done. And he promised the Japanese investors that more work will be done there. Next generation infrastructure, skill development, there also there is a lot of effort which needs to be done. Japanese language, I recall when Prime Minister Abe had come few years back, there was a proposal that about 30,000 Indian foremen will be trained in Japan. Because in manufacturing, if India has to improve, the quality issues come up. And the shop floor, not engineers, but the foremen, the supervisors, they need to be trained in Japanese ways of doing actual manufacturing. And how do they ensure both timely manufacture, delivery, as well as quality? So very specifics, and I believe that a lot of work is going on in that direction. So we need to learn more from Japan in skill development as well as the technology. But India is a huge market, and as Prime Minister said, that India can be a springboard for Japanese manufacturers, Japanese businesses, Japanese industry to satisfy the growing Indian market as well as be a springboard for the entire global South. So he laid out a very convincing roadmap for the future of India-Japan economic and cooperation, particularly in manufacturing and co-development of technology as well as transfer of technology to India to make India Viksit Bharat in 2047.
Right. Coming to you now, Professor Roy, on how do you look at the way Prime Minister mentioned at least twice in his speech the voice of the Global South, and he spoke of how manufacturing would help the African continent as well, and how, like Ambassador was saying, the focus is on India and Japan becoming a springboard, or India becoming a springboard to Japanese businesses and also to the global South, because this, many would believe, is a bilateral economic forum between India and Japan. Yet the concern of the global South is being reflected by the Prime Minister even when this visit is taking place in the bilateral context.
Let me draw your attention to the fact that in most of the joint statements that we've had so far, there has been sections that was gone beyond the bilaterals, whether it was in form of AAGC, Asia-Africa Growth Corridor, number of years back, to the Quad concerns that has been put up in the joint statements. So joint statements between bilaterals also have indicators of multilateral outings. What is important for us to understand is that Japan had a TICAD, that is Tokyo Africa platform that they share everything, and this time it was in Yokohama a few weeks back, in which Japan has shown keen interest to invest in Africa. Africa, as we all know, has strong reasons why we should be, because it's a resource-rich continent. It is a developing continent, so there is a lot of places where there can be convergence of interest for both India and Japan. AAGC was promoted in those lines, but for various reasons there has been teething issues, but we assume that now it will take over. As I felt when I saw both the Prime Minister's speech, it shows that there is a lot of convergence of interest between both these countries. What we need to probably now figure out is, if we are going to be working in a third country, or as I say, going beyond the bilaterals, what are the platforms that we can converge? What is the kind of expectations that the third country has over this convergence? I think that connect has to happen to enable us to make things. There are, of course, in Indonesia and Vietnam, we already have examples where we've sort of worked out a little, and I'm sure there would be more such engagements which would show the strength of this bilateral relationship going beyond the bilaterals.
Yes. Let me now go across to my colleague Shubhendu Ghosh, who is covering that India-Japan Business Forum meeting there. Shubhendu, if you could quickly tell us how are those two speeches by the two Prime Ministers received by the business community there and representatives from India as well from business there in Tokyo?
Well, the kind of engagement that we've been having with the business community in Tokyo, both Indian and Japanese companies, it appears, Gautam, that most of the key concerns appear to have been addressed by the two Prime Ministers, particularly in putting forth the vision of partnership, taking forward the partnership really between the two countries. One particular point that Prime Minister Modi mentioned about making a Japan-ready workforce, that has been received with particular interest. It's also a message that Prime Minister may be delivering in Tokyo, but a lot of youth, youngsters, talented young people back in India must be listening to that point very keenly, where the Prime Minister particularly talking about Japan ready, a country-specific workforce to be ready, reference to the language and the skill set as well. That is one area where most businesses have been talking about, that that's a gap area that can potentially be filled, and that could in fact be a catalyst to help achieve the other achievement in diverse areas, cooperation, whether it's clean energy, whether it is green hydrogen. When the Prime Minister speaks about nuclear and shipbuilding technology, all of it. These are labor-rich also enterprises where a skilled workforce, the skill coming from India, the manufacturing happening in India with support from Japanese technology, and a role of a partnership. Prime Minister Modi talks about a strategic partnership that we often use that phrase, but also a strategic and smart partnership. And what makes it smart, perhaps, is to be able to very efficiently recognize the gap areas and areas of opportunity and put the best things together. And that's what it appears the two prime ministers are doing in putting the idea forth to the business community, in saying that the strengths of both Indian and Japanese infrastructure are available for the business communities to utilize and take it forward. And Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba making that point towards the conclusion that both governments are committed to supporting the businesses, because that is where those are the people, those are the enterprises who are going to take the growth and development story of this partnership to the next level.
Absolutely. Well, Shubhendu, stay with us. We thank Professor Roy Chaudhary for having joined us with your very intriguing and interesting inputs. Thank you for speaking to us on this special broadcast. And we'll continue the discussion. Let's go across to Ambassador Tayal now. Ambassador, we've seen, in a sense, a vision statement by the Prime Minister across sectors, but now all focus would be how one does operationalize this, because Professor Chaudhary was earlier speaking of how there has to be complementarity and all countries and all the parties need to be on the same page when it comes to cooperation with the third party here, like the African continent, etc. But if we, for instance, take up the issue of the green energy transition, the Prime Minister spoke of how India is targeting by 2030 500 gigawatt renewable energy target. By 2047, we are looking at 100 gigawatt nuclear energy target. Vis-a-vis Japan, we already have a civil nuclear cooperation agreement. So if you could tell us what are the ways in which this target, for instance, or the target related to green energy transition could be operationalized?
Then there could be perhaps four components. One is the solar energy, where Japan is also a partner in the International Solar Alliance, but somehow all the solar cells, etc., the entire market is with the Chinese companies. So where are the Japanese companies? And in case there is Japanese technology, then India could be a right place for the Japanese to manufacture solar cells to satisfy the very large and growing market of solar cells in India, and also to the other members of the International Solar Alliance. Then the emerging technology on which India has placed a lot of faith, and perhaps other countries also, is the green hydrogen. Physics is there, but technology is yet to be developed. How to miniaturize, how to make it safe, and how to store energy which is produced from renewable sources of energy. And there, India has a huge mission. I think 20,000 crore rupees were promised to be invested in this in the previous budget. So India and Japan can work together in development of new technologies, because physics is there. It is clear that it is possible. But how to make technology commercially viable so that the per unit cost of energy produced from green hydrogen is comparable to the per unit cost of energy created by other sources like hydro or nuclear. Then third, on nuclear, India is placing a lot of emphasis. After the disaster in nuclear power station in Japan, Japan has sort of stepped back from large nuclear power plants, but they still have the technology, the reactor vessels, and all kinds of components, and they can become a partner with our nuclear power cooperation, so that our target, we have a very ambitious target of domestically producing nuclear energy. I think 20,000 megawatt was mentioned by Honorable Prime Minister. But to be very frank, we do not have the technical capacity and manufacturing capacity. Now, government is very focused that the Nuclear Liability Act, which was preventing foreign companies, whether Japanese or American or French, in participating in India's nuclear power program, that would be amended. Because at present, it is that even if the Nuclear Power Corporation of India runs the power plant and a reactor vessel, let us say, comes from Japan or France and something goes wrong, God forbid, then the unlimited liability was placed on the component supplier. And no country in the whole world has that kind of a Nuclear Liability Act, but it happened. And that needs to be amended. And once that is amended, then there is a huge scope for the participation of nuclear power companies of Japan, which do not have orders in Japan at present, to become partners of India's nuclear power program. And
yes,
then
but if I may come here, Ambassador Tayal, Prime Minister also mentioned about India-Japan joint credit agreement. He said that that has been reached. So what role could that play in achieving the target?
Joint credit agreement?
Yes. If Shubhendu, if you could come in on this.
Right, Bunbun, in fact, the points that have been mentioned here takes our attention now towards the next big engagement that the two leaders have. That's the 15th annual summit, and where we're expecting one of the big announcements are going to be a significant jump in the investment partnership that India and Japan make. The very ambitious roadmap that both prime ministers have presented. Prime Minister Modi, in particular, when he talks about the kind of value that India brings in terms of its scale, and market, it does require significant investments as well. So the confidence of the Japanese manufacturers industry that has been in fact achieved over the decades, the case study of Suzuki and Toyota also mentioned. So all of this would require capital and money and confidence and partnership in that domain. And that is where I think the next development of the annual summit that takes place later this evening, and what comes out of it, if it does in fact address that concern of the investment deficit that developing countries have to tackle with, especially in the times of the tariff diplomacy that countries like India and Japan are facing. If that big announcement comes, then it does put, and if we connect the dots, so to say, it does appear that these are not just ambitions, but the roadmap could in fact be realized with real money also coming in.
Mm-hmm. Let's also recount some of the experts' significant parts of Prime Minister Modi's speech there at the joint forum. Now, the PM said India and Japan's partnership is strategic and smart and powered by economic logic. We have turned shared interests into shared prosperity.
And Japan's partnership is strategic and smart, powered by economic logic. We have turned shared interest into shared prosperity. India is the springboard for Japanese businesses to the global south. Together, we will shape the Asian century for stability.
Also said that the technology of Japan and the talent of India can together lead the technological revolution of this century.
जापान टेक पावर हाउस है और भारत एक टैलेंट पावर हाउस है। भारत ने एआई, सेमीकंडक्टर, क्वांटम कंप्यूटिंग, बायोटेक और स्पेस में बोल्ड और एम्बिशियस इनिशिएटिव लिए हैं। जापान की टेक्नोलॉजी और भारत का टैलेंट मिलकर इस सदी के टेक रिवॉल्यूशन का नेतृत्व कर सकते हैं.
The Prime Minister also mentioned the kind of space that Japanese auto giants like Suzuki and Toyota have in the Indian market now in manufacturing as well. And he said that together, again referring to manufacturing, he said we can replicate the magic that was created in the auto sector. And he mentioned batteries, robotics, semiconductors, shipbuilding, even nuclear energy. Take a look.
भारत तेजी से 2030 तक 500 गीगावाट रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी के लक्ष्य की ओर अग्रसर है. हमने 2047 तक 100 गीगावाट न्यूक्लियर पावर का भी लक्ष्य रखा है. सोलर सेल्स हो या फिर ग्रीन हाइड्रोजन, साझेदारी की अपार संभावनाएं हैं. भारत और जापान के बीच जॉइंट क्रेडिट मैकेनिज्म पर समझौता हुआ है. इसका लाभ उठाकर क्लीन और ग्रीन फ्यूचर के निर्माण में सहयोग किया जा सकता है.
And Subimal Bhattacharjee, a columnist on foreign affairs, is now joining us in the studio. Welcome,
He wears many hats,
Subimal.
cybersecurity as well.
Yes, absolutely. Well, so of course, all that will come handy today. Well, Subimal, you know, your thoughts on how the vision statement can be operationalized. It's a vision statement cutting across sectors. The Prime Minister, like we just heard, spoke of how the kind of progress that India and Japan have seen together in the automotive sector can be replicated in batteries, space and other sectors as well.
Thank you, Munmun. I think the Prime Minister himself has laid the ground for, you know, how we take the relationship forward. He just mentioned about technology from Japan and talent from India. Now, if you think this match is absolutely just I would say so pertinent at this point of time when India has taken the leap in manufacturing and particularly in areas of strategic interest. You just mentioned about batteries, robotics, semiconductor, artificial intelligence. Now these are all the sectors in which